two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast with James and Mark. And we've been happily saying for the last few weeks, it's been a nice warm England. It's now sweltering England. I'm going to melt during this interview because I had to turn all my fans off and close the doors in my outdoor office.
You haven't got any fans, James.
You said you got a small fan.
I have a very small fan, yes. It's tiny. Actually, very appropriate, SPF at the moment. We are SPF
Yes.
factor 50. It is very, very hot here, 30 degrees or so in Salisbury, probably the same for you.
Yeah.
I think we're forecast up for at least the next week, 10 days. So it is pretty bogging hot.
It's going to be
in the southwest
into the 90s in old speak, and but it's beautiful place to be, England, when the sun shines, which is ironic because when most people will be listening to this, you and I will be in the US. So we're going to Thriller Fest in New York next week, and I've posted the details in our group of a get-together in New York. We would love to see you. If you're even a casual listener to the podcast, you want to come along to this bar, I'm going to tell you the details in a moment. Tap us on the shoulder, we will buy you a drink and say hello, and we'd love to meet you. So the bar is called The Stout, and it's the Stout Grand Central. So I think the Stout actually have 3 or 4 locations in New York. So it's the one at Grand Central Station, or very close to it. I'll give you the address in a second. It's going to be Wednesday, the 11th of July at 7 p.m. Eastern, so 7 p.m. local in New York. 60 East, 41st Street, New York, New York. So great, they named it twice. 117. It's basically across the road from Grand Central, between Madison and Park, I think. Is that right? Is that between Madison and Park? Yes, between Madison and Park. Okay, good. So if you can get to that next Wednesday, if you listen to this in time, we release it on the Tuesday. We will be in a nice, cool, air-conditioned bar in New York. Now, you're going to have a busy time because you're meeting all your regulars, aren't you? Apple and Amazon, etc. whilst in New York.
I've got drinks with Apple before the SPF drink. So if I turn up half cut, you can blame Uncle
Steve Jobs,
Tim Cook. And then, I think I'll probably be seeing Amazon. And then I'm off from New York. I'm getting on a train and I'm going up to Boston to see Booklab. So I'll be in their offices on the Monday. And then I'm going to fly to Los Angeles, which is actually longer in the air than it is from London to New York. From Boston to LA is 6.5 hours. And then I'm going to go to a meeting, which is quite exciting, on the Universal lot. So I'm going to the grill on the Universal lot. So I think there's a reasonable chance I might see some people I recognize.
Yeah.
And I'll be talking about TV shows with the producers that I'm working with. So seeing them. And then on the next day, I've got a day in LA. And then I am hopping on another plane down to Denver, where I'll be speaking at RWA. I'm seeing Chrissy from Kobo, having dinner with her on the Wednesday. There's an SPF meetup on the Thursday at 1 o'clock. Thursday, I think it's at 1 o'clock. The details will be in the group. And then finally, on the Friday, jump on another plane and fly home again. So it's a 10-day. I don't normally. I'm not normally away that long, so 10 days for me is quite a long stretch to be away from the family. So I'm going to pack in as much as I can.
But we would love it if you were able to come and see us either in New York or Denver. Later in the year, there will be an opportunity in Florida. We're a very people-orientated company, right? I know a lot of digital entrepreneurs and digital companies, you don't really see their students. You occasionally see some writing, which is a kind of testimonial, but we can't wait to go meet our friends who are involved in SPF and film them. So they're very much a front of house thing with us. So we're all about the people. And there may even be, have I got it here? We have some very nice, you've probably seen them in the Facebook group, some very nice SPF pins, of which I've lost mine. But I've got stacks more, and I think we may end up checking a bag in, which I hate doing, but we'll get those pins over there. So that's it. New York next week, if you're listening to this in time. Now, if you're just listening to this because you want to get some value out of listening to a self-publishing podcast, this is a very good episode to listen to. It's going to be longer. I'm going to warn you now, this will be a longer episode as the first Booklab was. So Booklab was, I think, my idea originally originally, and I'll edit that out. May have been Mark's idea. And the idea is that we simply choose somebody in the SPF community and we take one of their books and we get the experts to look at their book cover, their blurb, and they look inside for a little bit of an idea about the first chapter or so of the book from an editor. And the idea is that we all learn from the observations that are made, that person in particular gets a great deal from this package and gets to repackage their books. The first one we did was David Behrens, and I think I've already reported back that David has told us it has made a difference straight away to his sales, to his visibility, which is what we want this to be. It's not just a cosmetic exercise, it's got to tangibly affect your sales. That's why we're doing this, and we're all learning from each one. Now, we've picked somebody else. You had a look at the selections, and there's a very strong random element to this, and anyone who's our Patreon Gold is eligible, but I think it was right that we picked a different genre this time, and we went for Helena Halme, who's based in the UK, actually originally Finnish, and it's a romance book.
That's right. Yeah. So I wanted to move away from the kind of mystery and thriller that David did to cover romance, which is still one of the, if I think it must be the biggest self-publishing genre. So important that we at least cover that fairly towards the start of the Booklab series. So Helena had suggested that she'd like to be considered. I had a quick look at her books and thought that it was a pretty good fit.
Yeah. Now, if you want to follow along, I would really advise for this episode that you watch it on YouTube. Now, I know we do have most of our audience still consume the podcast audio-wise, and for most episodes, that's absolutely fine. You're not going to miss out on much. In this particular episode, there's a bit of visual stuff to it, so the cover goes up, and Helena herself goes through her covers on screen and so on. So it may well help you to watch this episode on YouTube, maybe as well as listening to it. But if you do want to follow along audio-wise, you will need to go to this page, which is selfpublishingformula.com/booklab2, booklab2, all one word. And there you can download the original blurb, the new blurb, and a link to the Amazon page that we're talking about, and the cover as it is at the moment, as we're speaking at the moment. And I've asked Helena just to hold off making any significant changes for a couple of weeks so people can see what it is the experts were looking at the time. Having said that, let's move into the feedback from the experts. Let's start with the cover, because that's how we judge the book. And that, of course, is our resident expert, Stewart Bache. I always get his name wrong. Stewart Bache. And Stewart, little spoiler, quite like the cover. That's as much as I'm going to say. Let's hear what Stewart thought about the cover. Oh, I should say, I haven't said the book's title. So Helena Halme is the author. The book is The English Heart. Okay, so she has a series, The Faithful Heart, etc. This is The English Heart. You'll find that on Amazon. Let's hear what Stewart had to say. Okay, Stewart, so a little bit different this time. As I've been saying to the other guys as well, we had we've got a romance, effectively, now. Yeah. The English Heart, Helena Halme. And the cover, for most people, will be listening. A few people, 1,000 or so, watch it on YouTube. They will try and put the cover up onto YouTube so you can see it as we talk about it. But why don't you start off by describing the cover to us, Stewart?
So it is a beautiful scene with a couple. It has a nice serif typeface. It is very women's fiction. It's very it works straight away. You instantly know what genre it is. So it has a lot of positives, this cover.
Yep. And we've got a couple with their backs to us.
Yeah. On a sort of beachy scene.
On beachy scene, looking out to sea, holding hands behind their backs with her head cradled onto his shoulder.
Yes.
As they look wistfully to the sea. And the first thing, I suppose, I can hear you're going to say it already, and I'll say it as well, does the job as a romance cover, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It uses the right sort of typeface, the right sort of, it has everything about it. The aesthetic is right.
Yeah. And we shouldn't underestimate the importance of that, because we mentioned this before, but when you get that bit wrong, it's really, really fundamental, because you've got to look at a cover and know what the book is.
Yeah, you have seconds of browsing, whether in a bookshop or online, you have seconds. So you need to know straight away what it is. And it's not just about title and author, it's about the look and feel as well.
Okay, right. Well, let's delve a little bit deeper. So, with a more critical eye, could this cover be improved?
There are a few little tweaks that I would have made. I think I had a look at the series as well, and it's very strong. There's a really strong series style. The only thing I would suggest was maybe, I'm just looking at the cover on my second screen down here because I'm partial. I have two screens. It is that I would just make sure that the author name stands out a little bit more. And this actually happens on her other covers as well, is that there's a lovely sky that's been added, but what it does is it interacts with the type a little bit too much. Okay. So there's two things you can do there. You can either use a complementary color, so that's a color that's usually opposite on the spectrum. So with the blue in the background, opposites tend to be oranges, yellows, and reds, and that will really pop. Otherwise, the actual typefaces themselves are great. Some lovely serif. It looks like Garamond or something like that. And it works really well. I think the other thing that I would do is make more of the series name. It sort of disappears. It's also very white. You might even miss it. And her quote, I would beef that up. Now, there are a few ways you can do that. So you can either cut the actual main quote down and and then bring the type size up. Or you can limit the added bit at the bottom, so who it's by, who's the quote's by. Take all the details off that you don't need; it's not necessary, and just make the quote big, and then have the author name or whoever it's from, whether it's the Sunday Times or something like that. You can just have that. That's all. That's what's necessary, really.
Okay.
Another tip of to bring the author name up a bit is just to add a little bit of white or something very, very light coloring just behind the type, just to sort of boost it up. So if you're not happy with changing the color to something like a red or an orange, which some people might find a bit garish, but just lighten it a little bit more and just sort of reduce that noise that's interacting too much with the type.
Okay, so I mean it's big and clear, the author name Helena Halme here, but what you're saying is it's too similar. It's the blues not far away from this, so it doesn't pop. It doesn't stand out.
It doesn't. I mean, you can. I mean, I'm not one for the thumbnail thing. I think it's a bit of a myth to worry too much about what covers look like in thumbnails. Because we've been buying books for years before we had ebooks even in thumbnail form, so no one cared then. But it does disappear a little bit the smaller it gets. And, it is important.
I'm putting white behind it. So that would be a sort of brushing, I don't know what tool you'd use because you're the expert, not me. Brush, but brush. And what to make it look like a bit more cloud behind the title?
Yeah, I mean, it could even just be really, really subtle. So it could just be, you could maybe select that very light blue and just subtly sort of just, brush behind it. Very low opacity, doesn't have to be much at all, but just anything that will just boost it up a little bit. Yeah. I always recommend actually interacting with a layer. So actually adding a brush, something that you can control, rather than adding effects. So adding like a big outer glow or something like that, which is basically a uniform glow that goes around every letter. Because that looks fake.
Yeah.
Whereas actually you don't really need to do much there. You can just add you could even reduce the sky a little bit if you wanted to.
Darken it.
But I mean, these are just things that I'm just picking up little points because actually everything's there.
Yeah.
The colors, the contrast, it has a really nice Instagram feel about it as well, which is really lovely.
Yeah.
It's a very nice modern feel to it.
It's quite a high contrast, isn't it? Sort of cranks up a little bit on the levels.
I think the one that my wife likes the most is there's an effect on Instagram called Clarendon, which is basically that.
Mm-hmm.
High contrast, bright colors, strong, black and white. I mean, I get the other thing is, these books are very nautical. Obviously, if you read the blurb and stuff, and this really, it works really well.
Yeah, it works. In fact, it works really well with the opening few pages of this, where this she meets this mysterious Englishman who lives at sea, effectively, and they're looking out to sea, and she's got his head on her shoulder. So, I think that works really nicely. A good picture to have chosen. And what do you think about the italics in the title? So, we should just say again, if you can look at this. I mean, just go to Helena Halme's Amazon page if you're able to do that. If you're watching us on YouTube, we'll try and stick this up, as I say. And the italic, clearly the English heart, English is in italics, and that's to denote the fact that there is a series here. There's the good heart, the true heart, the young heart, etc. And then when I first saw that, I wasn't sure what I thought of that.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. I think it's more of a design idea rather than something that necessarily is necessary. It's an extra, it's an addition rather than something that it has a strong point of, it doesn't necessarily make it any better. It doesn't make it worse, but it does make you sort of focus on the word English. I don't know whether that's necessary or not. But I would maybe, in my design brain, I see a little space between the and heart. So I'd want to reduce that, but that's just not something that's necessary, but it's just the way my head works. I don't mind it, actually. You could try it in all, in Roman, so that's straight type, so that's standard type. You could also, another way of maybe playing with this is that it's very, very popular in the genre to use proper script font. So not something that you'd find on your computer, but you can find you could handwrite it yourself and scan it in and put it in. That's what I used to do for years. Or you can find some really amazing script fonts now. There's even a few on Google Fonts for free. Yeah, and you could try that. Those work really, really well in this genre. Yes,
in romance. I mean, I was thinking about that actually because I've seen, obviously I edited together your brilliant course where you talk in detail about this, and we should plug the course, shouldn't we? You can find that if you go to our website and /courses. But I do think, having picked up the tone and theme of this particular book, I think that the female lead is a relatively assertive, feisty character. Feisty might not be quite the word, and it didn't quite fit. I think she's probably gone the right route and not using the very flowery script for this. Okay. For me personally, I don't know why my opinion counts here, but I wasn't not 100% about the italics. I think it would work well, just equally well. So in your view, it's not a disaster. No, it does make it stand out, but it's not necessary. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not necessary. It's just a flourish. It's not something that's that will make it sell more or less. But if there's a point in highlighting that word, then that's then it's obviously done it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk to Helena. It'll be interesting to find out. Also interesting to find out whether she does her own covers or whether they've been designed. I don't know.
Yeah, it would be really interesting. If she does these herself, then I'm really impressed. They're really good. They're really, really good. And there's a really nice link, as I say, throughout the series. And I know we're only looking at this cover, but I like to look at everything just because you get to get an idea of how they all work and whether they, one design's great, but if it doesn't then translate, then it doesn't work. And so you have to really think about, especially if you're writing a series, you really have to think about how they all work together.
Yes, and making changes is complicated because you have to replicate that. I think I left out the Faithful Heart from that list. There's a few. And she's written some other genre books as well, Helena. She's a very interesting author. Great. Well, look, there's some good practical tips for Helena and some learning for the rest of us in what makes a good cover. And we should say today is a special day in the Stewart Bache household because you have become an author yourself today.
Yeah, I hesitate to use that word, but because I know so many brilliant authors. But I've written my first non-fiction book, which The Author's Guide to Cover Design, and it's published today, and I'm really chuffed, and I'm very tired.
I bet you are. So now you know what goes into it. The Author's Guide to Cover Design, so you'll find that on all good online retailers.
You will indeed.
Super. Good luck with the book, Stewart, and thank you as ever for your very valuable feedback on
Absolute pleasure.
Booklab too. There'll be another one down the line in the future.
Yeah, look forward to it.
In the meantime, good luck with your book sales.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, Stewart. So not much for Helena to do, and we have an interview with Helena at the end of the podcast when we've been through the experts' feedback, and so she was obviously quite pleased that basically Stewart liked it. Just to clarify that I did say in the interview I wasn't sure whether Helena had done the covers herself. She had not, and she actually name checks her cover designer in her interview. But there were some small things just about things like the name not popping out And it took me a while to really see what Stewart was talking about. But then that is the value of talking to an expert who lives and breathes this one area. And despite the fact, I suppose, Mark, that as self-publishing authors, you have to kind of ride different horses during the day, it's still good to have an absolute expert in one area to help you.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, that's what Stewart does, as you say, and it makes a lot of sense. It's one of the big investments is to get your cover done professionally. There's not much point in writing a great novel and have it edited if your cover is something that you've knocked up yourself. At least if you're someone like me, if you've got a decent set of skills and you know how to do book covers, then you have a go. But generally speaking, that's not something I'd cut my costs on. You want to make sure that's as good as you can get it.
Okay, now we have a really good and exciting set of feedback from Brian Cohen coming up on Blurb. Before then, let's hear from Jenny. Jenny has this critical view of the writing, of the structure, of whether it engages the reader or not. This is what she lives and breathes and thinks about all the time. So Jenny Parrott is the person we went to look at the book itself, and we took the look inside bit. So this is really a marketing focus on. This is the look inside on Amazon, which is actually quite substantial. I can't remember how many characters it is, but it's several pages of the book. And this is what Jenny thought. Jenny, hello. Here we are again with our second victim in the Booklab. And I have to say, thank you so much for your contribution the first time. It was a really fantastic episode. I think
brilliant.
We've had really good feedback on it. And I think authors,
fantastic.
Just listening to you talk in a very commercial way about the writing, as well as, you know, from a sort of literacy point of view, was very, very worthwhile. So thank you for your contribution so far.
Right.
And we're moving on to our second one. I should say, just as we've started this interview, my wife has started mowing the lawn, which is excellent news for the lawn, but it's a slight buzzing sound in the background. I'm just going to point that out.
You're just keeping it real for everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. We are real people. Okay, so a very different book this time.
Very different.
Yeah, romance. So Helena Halme, The English Heart, part of a series. What was your initial take on the sort of presentation and the sell of the book in terms of the writing?
I suppose what I really felt was that the editing, I hate to criticise another editor, and whatever has happened with this, I just felt it wasn't quite tight enough. So the problem you get when you're doing an excerpt is that you want people to want to read on. And there are a couple of little things in this that might give a certain type of reader pause for thought. 90% of readers won't notice that, it's just those little tiny tweaks. I don't know. I would guess that Helena didn't start with English as her first language.
There's obviously a Nordic theme, and they're are they Finnish? I think Finnish, potentially girls who start in the opening scene visiting an ambassador's reception, where presumably there's some Ferrero Rocher on offer.
Yes, that's right.
So that's how it starts. And so can you clarify a little bit of what you're talking about, that 10% of reader just... It's not gripping enough, or there's not intrigue enough?
No, it wasn't so much that. It was actually, I thought the story started quite well. I might have trimmed it very slightly, but generally what Helena is saying is fine. It's more those tiny little things like slightly too many ellipses, the 3 dots being used. The book is set in 1980 at this party, and somebody says, "Can I?" instead of "May I?" which in diplomatic language would be, even today, people would probably say, "May I offer you a drink?" at that type of reception.
Whereas today we say, "Can I get you a drink?"
Yeah,
which makes no sense, but is what we say now. There's a subtle change in language, right?
Absolutely. So what it is, it wasn't 100% in keeping with the time, and so, but that is quite specialised sort of editing to make the fabric feel completely robust of a historical period, but without the reader noticing. The problem is when you just get the shades of words, going a bit askew, some people will pick up on that. There was another bit where one thing I really think Helena needs to watch is that she's using stock adjectives. So sparkling eyes, and then later on she had eye sparkled and a sparkling chandelier. First of all, she's using in a short number of pages certain words too often. But the other thing is, Mills and Boon is happy to use sparkling eyes. This book, which potentially would be what the publishing industry calls Booklab, you might sort of encourage a writer to think of something that will you don't have to try and shock the reader with every adjective, but maybe just not be those shortcuts. In crime, it's always engines being gunned.
Yes.
That sort of thing. So, I always encourage writers with adjectives, just think about them. Don't because that's what you use describing something to a friend. Think there couldn't be a more subtle or better alternative on the page.
Okay, but having said that, Mills and Boon sell a ton of books, right? So there's also a pair of slippers you put on sometimes in a very comfortable.
Completely. But the thing is that books at the level that Helena is at, they're called by publishers and booksellers Booklab. The thing about Mills and Boon is they sell the same number of books every month. People, go and buy their 12 books or download them. They know what they're getting. They want familiarity. The book club section of the market needs to appeal to those readers, but it also needs to appeal to up the level of readers. So readers who read literary books but would choose a book club book to go on holiday with. So that it's for those readers you're appealing. So, and also it's good for all writers not to get into, the easy way. The steaming cup of tea, and you see, once it's pointed out to you, you suddenly realise, oh my God, I can see that.
You realise there's thousands of authors listening to this and now racking their brains, going through their book, thinking I need to remove all these cliches.
Completely, you don't have to remove them all, but, sort of it's all about making the text seamless so that, that you don't feel that, I'm here again. But particularly what no writer really should be doing is using certain words too regularly. So say, I notice it with my own writing. You don't see it when you write, but when you by the time you're getting to proof stage, those words are normally popping out at you. And at that point, it is always worth doing a word check. But the second thing you have to look at when you're dealing with it is you don't replace it with another word that you've kind of overused. So sometimes it's just easier to delete. Everything doesn't need to have an adjective.
Yeah, to be described. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. That's all good stuff. And the last time when we talked about Dave Beren's book, I think we both really liked the character quite quickly and got to know him quite quickly, and there was a bit of intrigue there. Did you think there was enough here as well to make us want to read on?
I did. Yes, I definitely thought it was good. So, yes, that's what actually, this is a writer I felt a reader would feel quite confident in quickly. One thing I would mention, though, is the short preface. I don't think it's doing the book a favour in this, partly because it is you have to, in publishing, with historical, you have to make it of its time, but you have to make it understandable to modern day readers. So here we have two films which are appropriate to the time, but they won't mean anything to, a great tranche of under 40s. They might have heard of sort of vaguely, love story or The Way We Were. But it's so basically what this preface is relying very much on these films, which are both 1970s films, and then it's referred to Katie and Hubble without making it clear which film they come to. So when I read this first, I thought Katie and Hubble were going to be characters that were going to come out in the book. And it was only after I'd got to the end of this, I suddenly thought, I think I've misread that preface. And so then I did the Google on that, and I thought, of course, they're in The Way We Were. But most people won't remember their names. So it's one that, it's not an ill-written preface. It sets up the story in a way, but I think it falls into the category of creating more questions in the reader's mind than it's kind of delivering in excitement.
Yes, I see what you mean. It's not crystal clear, is it? That last sentence, having reflected on the two films, and then Katie had to Hubble. And I remember Love Story, I quite liked it, but I can't remember the character names from The Way We Were, and even if I have seen it. So Katie and Hubble, exactly the same with me. There was some confusion.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there's that little preface, and I quite like a sort of single. I mean, I did it in my book. You probably won't remember, but I did a kind of description of when a crash happens and the mood changes on a squadron. Just left it hanging there by itself, slightly background. I quite liked setting up a tone, but this. So the idea maybe of a sentence or two of when love hit me, it was something I hadn't really tasted before, and then go into the story. But more leave it as very hanging there, not too.
Or the other way you can do it is actually write a bit more, and then maybe she could describe, the Englishman without really saying who he is. She thought of his hands, on the glass when she first saw him, something like that. I would probably have her remembering a physical attribute of him.
Okay.
And partly because then for some readers these days, you're just saying, okay, this is likely to be a heterosexual love story.
Yes. Okay.
Just without having to do
clearly signal. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and then just coming back to that, and then what often works well is if you do that, you can even use a section from later in the book and use it at the front. But when you use it then in later on, it can be altered slightly, so it is an echo. So because by then the reader has more information on the characters. So I think what's happened with this preface, there is nothing wrong with the idea behind it as such. It's just not really working hard enough for what it needs to do.
Okay. I remember when you talked to me about my book, you suggested that I write a brief history of CND in the Cold War to bring people up to date, to remind older people and to tell younger people what the atmosphere was. And I wondered a bit about, so I wrote that and I quite liked the section, but I wonder about keeping people from the story, particularly in the look inside when... Well,
this is the problem with, the look inside bit. It swings and roundabouts that for some readers, having some knowledge and starting them off, with a bit of setting isn't a bad thing. But it doesn't necessarily read well. You wouldn't want to have a whole lot. Sometimes I kind of encourage writers to fudge it a bit. So you have a bit more scene setting in the, so it could be after, the ambassador's party or something was a way to get over the horrible headlines in the press.
Okay, so you work in some context.
Then very briefly. And then what I normally do is, and of course I've not read this whole book and I haven't seen what's at the end, I then will put sometimes a historical note at the back.
Okay.
That will give, and sometimes even, suggest books for people to go and read if they're interested enough in the period. So there are several ways you can do this. I think all writers must beware of thinking that because they are interested in a certain period and setting, that their readers necessarily will be.
Yeah. Okay.
Once
you do limit yourself, don't you, if you do really go down that route to people who are just like you, and there aren't not everyone's.
Absolutely, but the way around that is to do great characters, and here I think Kaiser and Thule are potentially quite interesting. So I'm not particularly worried about this book, and actually I think the setting seems good. I'd be quite invested in wanting to know, what happens to this. And one thing I do think as well, though, that the author would have benefited by just using his name, to keep calling him the Englishman.
Okay.
Puts him. He becomes very emblematic rather than
human
a character as such. Whereas you've already got his name. I can't remember what it is now. Actually, my notes, so I can't actually see what it is. But it's this. Sometimes this tell the story.
Yes. Okay. Rather than him saying that. Okay.
So, yeah. So we've all got the impression. Yes, he's an Englishman. These are Finnish.
Yeah.
Girls,
I was going to ask you about names, actually, because obviously this is Scandinavian. It's advertised as Nordic romance. And I've always got a slight thing with words and names that are difficult to pronounce when I'm reading a book, because you kind of read books quite quickly. And unless you stop at that moment, look at it a lot, try to work out how it's pronounced for the entire rest of the book, in your mind, you kind of just fudge it when you get to that name and move on. And there's quite a lot in this opening section. There's names of places and characters which are very Scandinavian and don't trip off the English-speaking tongue, I don't think. Would you advise on that? Would you say if you're going to use Scandinavian names, use them very easy to pronounce, or is it an issue at all?
I definitely would have your main characters as easy to pronounce and easy to recognise. I was reading a book the other day, and I think it was set in Japan. Anyway, it was an Asian, and I've read about 6 Asian books recently, so I can't quite remember where this one was set, but I think it was Japan, and the names read quite similarly, and you see, because they weren't familiar names to me, I was having real struggles with which sex they were, and which was the main character. And so I think, but actually I think, Kaiser and Thule, I don't think they're bad names. They're quite like names we might see. When you're getting on to the names of houses, roads...
Lautasari Island, or Lautasari Island. That's not too bad. Lautasari, you can say that. And then there was Mannerheim Street. Now this is one. There's got, is it an umfleck? The two, like a colon on its side.
Don't ask. Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't know. Yeah,
but Toolo, and all 3 O's have that double thing on top of it, so I don't really know how to pronounce Tulu, but which is where Thule lives, by the way. Thule lives in Tulu.
Yes, obviously now you're going to get a lot of Finnish speakers.
Yes, angry with me, saying, of course.
Lesson. yes. How can you not understand? So what you want is a sprinkling of this sort of thing to give a sense of it, but you need to think, if you don't, for that sort of thing, I always think about the more challenged readers, readers who may take 2 months to read a book. That's the sort of thing that can be difficult for them. So,
but it also takes you somewhere, takes you to another place, and that's what it's like being in Finland, seeing road signs that look unintelligible to us. So that's
absolutely So you don't want to strip it completely, but you see the way I tend to look at it is the first bit of your book needs to get your reader and hold your reader. So maybe winch it back in the initial stages, then you can allow a bit more colour to come in later, once people aren't having to try and juggle who the main characters are and what the general setting is. Then you can start building up the texture.
Great. Invested in it at that point. Jenny, superb, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your constructive feedback on that, particularly the editor's eye on some of the language. I think that's really useful for all of us to hear.
Yes, so with, I really think this is true for all writers. If people are noticing your writing, unless it's a super literary, unless you're Will Self and you're writing a whole book in one sentence or whatever, try not to draw attention to your writing. Yeah. So it is those little things, and sometimes it is laziness, and we all have to fight that. So I'm not saying you have to try and be dramatic and different, but just try and make it seamless. Allow your story, and particularly your characters, to have precedence. So, and I think all books benefit from a read of just what the language is like. And if when you're reading your own book, you're suddenly thinking a bit is dull, do pay attention to that, because you're invested in your own book.
Yeah, more than anyone else.
Yes, and if you're finding a bit dull, take a bit of a pruning shears. Or sometimes it works if you add a little more in front and, either side of that to kind of give it something to sit against. But, I think we can all sort of feel our way into this much more. But in Helena's case, I think this is, the writing is fit for purpose. It's not so bad or so brilliant that people are going to be horrified by it or amazed by it. But she's a clean writer.
Well, that's a good commercial place to be.
Pace. It's a really good place to be. So in her case, it's just that little bit of fine tuning to think, okay, well, how do I make characters from 1980, actors 1980 characters, speakers 1980 characters, but be intriguing for modern day readers, and just the poor thing, she now will be, terribly nervous about adjectives for a while. And I just say, don't do that, but just recognise that she, like all of us, we have pet things that just sneak in. So, I hope it does well for her. And there's certainly readers, who like books. Long term, the one thing I did want to say is the word romance is both a good and a bad thing to class it as. Yes, it sets it says very clearly what the book is, but some readers are even people who like quite commercial books are a bit snobby about romance. So it might be to have almost something. I would maybe suggest something like the Nordic Chronicles or something like that. So you're making it seem the Nordic Community Chronicles, or I can't think of what they should be now, but probably she might be limiting her market with romance. But on the other hand, it may be that romance is very discoverable on Amazon. And actually with this as well, she does, and I'm sure you've got the metadata sort of being covered in another podcast, but she really needs to get as many keywords. So, Nordic, Finland, romance, embassy, love, all of those things, so that when people search, this one pops forward. Yeah,
key is keywords, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. But think widely, because, sometimes you can get a bestseller flag by flagging it for a not particularly competitive area. So, so that might be something. So I'd probably put Finland and then maybe Finnish historical fiction or something like that. That might be the sort of thing that will sort of come up.
Find a niche
so I know
list.
you'll be dealing with that in another area, but it is something as a writer, if you're going to self-publish and there's a particular scene, so say it was set on a lake, I would have, it might be island is a sensible one, but something like got a scene on a lake, I'd put lake in.
Yeah.
On this, so just because some people might have a fetish for lakes, and and if they like romance, well, job done.
They're in. So, you found that is a niche, but that's good. Great. Okay. Jenny,
Brilliant.
Superb. Thank you so much indeed, and we'll look forward
thanking you.
We'll look forward to the next time out.
Brilliant. Okay.
So again, the headline is, I have said to Helen in the interview with her at the end, there's going to come a point with this Booklab where the experts hate everything about it, and I'm going to have to do give the feedback and then do the interview at the end of it. But so far, they've really kind of liked what they see. Jenny did pick up on some points, and I think an interesting aspect of this, and Helena touches on it as well, is taking feedback, and this is probably the most difficult feedback to take for an author, because the cover you're a bit distant from, the blurb you're a bit distant from, but the writing is you. And when somebody says you've overused this word, you want to think about the inflections and stuff, I guess there's a couple of ways of taking that, but the correct way is to say, what changes do I need to make this work?
Yeah, you can be an idiot about it and pretend that it's not valid, or you can be sensible and commercial and take it on board. No one is saying that there's a right and wrong, because there is a subjectivity about that kind of commentary. But at the same time, Jenny is a very good editor, and the editors I use are very good too. I've used Jenny. I've also I've got copy editors, proofreaders, and if they suggest changes, I almost always incorporate them. So if Jennifer, my copy editor, will spot that I'm using the word too much. Even it could be like 4 times in a 90,000 word manuscript. And if it's an unusual word, like, I don't know, pellucid, I've used that a few times more. Once is enough for a word like that, because it's unusual and it stands out. So she'll spot that and say, look, you need to change that. Now, there's no point in being offended by that, because if it caught her attention, it's also going to catch reader attention. So you need to... that's what you're paying them for. You need to pay attention to that kind of feedback. Does
a driver ever gun the engine when you write your books?
Not as much as they used to.
Yeah, because that's, most thrillers I've ever read, Da Vinci Code, I think, uses it probably about 17 times. You can't get into the car without gunning the engine.
So we could have a whole podcast dedicated to the writing of Dan Brown. But we won't do that, because, we're nice people.
And he's swimming in notes.
And he's swimming in money, exactly. So what do we know?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, I'm not being critical, just pointing it out. I think Jenny actually mentions gunning the engine at some point in one of the feedback interviews we do. Okay, now finally, I have actually, I'm not, no disrespect to Stewart and Jenny, did a great job on this and really useful, but I think the blurb was an area that could be improved on, and it was good to start off with, and Brian liked that, but Brian has done a really superb job on the blurb here. So again, if you want to follow along, you can download the original blurb or see it at Amazon if you're within 2 weeks of the date this goes out, which is 6th of July at Amazon. But if you want to go to selfpublishingformula.com/booklab2, you can download the original and the new blurb that Brian has written for this book. So let's hear from Brian. Okay, so Brian, the blurb genius. We need kind of an alliterative title. The blurb beatmaster, the blurb.
Well, originally, when I was coming up with the company name, Simon Whistler, formerly of the Rocking Self-Publishing podcast, called me Dr. Descriptio.
Oh, I like that superhero. That's Marvel-esque.
Yep. So that was your alliterative title.
Yeah. Yeah, well, sort of. Well, Dr. Descriptio. You wear your pants on the outside of your jeans and sort of mark and then project something into the sky. Yeah, I can see that happening. You may be in the next Infinity War. Okay, well, look, let's put the doctor to the test. Let's open the clinic and go into the surgery. So we have Helena Halme. She has a romance book, so very different from last time around, but an interesting challenge, I think, for our 3 resident experts. Now, her blurb is on Amazon. We do ask Helena and our Booklab people to keep the blurbs as they are at the time the podcast goes out, so people can read it, and then they can download the PDF to see the new version. So her blurb's quite short. The opening line is, they lived thousands of miles apart. She's engaged to be married and he sails around the world. Can their love go the distance? And then there are 5 more paragraphs. You've sent me your blurb. And first thing I noticed about your blurb is it's quite comprehensive, quite long. So we'll talk about that and length in a moment. And I'm also going to point out that actually her blurb is a little bit Cohen-esque, right? It is. There's a little setup. She's obviously been listening to the podcast and listening to you, Brian, because there's a little setup and there's that very important element of tension that you always talk about being in there. So I guess you started by looking and thinking, okay, well, she's made a good start. Did you think that?
I loved that Helena's blurb was so strong to begin with. And I thought David's was pretty good from the first Booklab, but I love that this was strong to begin with because it allows us to kind of go into the nitty-gritty of how to take a good blurb and attempt to make it great, because a lot of the blurbs we get from Best Page Forward, they're not half bad to begin with, but there are little things you can do along the way to try to get readers even more excited, increase that conversion rate of someone just browsing your page to someone actually buying, maybe take it from 1 in 20 to 1 in 15 or 1 in 15 to 1 in 10. So that's what we tried to do with this one.
Okay, I mean, that says a lot about you, that you like the challenge when it starts off already good, that you want to make it, take it to the next level. So it's not an easy win for you in that sense, that somebody's blurb comes in and it's terrible. That's an easy win for you to turn that into something that's decent. But you love the challenge of really, and you said to me straight away actually that you enjoyed doing this one.
Oh yeah. This was a fun one because I like that while it is a romance, it's also a period piece. It's set in Finland in 1980, I believe it was. And so we get to have that historical element in there a little bit. Bookbub did a study a while back that showed when a book is set in the past, they found that conversion increased when you include the location and the year right at the beginning there. And so we've gone from, as Helena has it, she has to mention that it's in Finland in the first sentence. It's compulsory information. But if we just have Finland, 1980, the scene is already set. We know where it is. We know it's probably cold and Scandinavian. And so we've got that right off the bat. And then we can just skip that and focus on the character right away rather than having to go too in depth into the time period.
Good. Well, for those of us writing Cold War novels, that's good to hear that there's a good conversion there. England, 1966. Okay, good. So do you want to talk me through your opening line, the new opening line?
Sure. So the new headline is, she has her life planned out. He lets the wind guide his sails. As the Cold War heats up, can they keep love alive on either side of the Iron Curtain? And so this is not all that different from Helena's, to be honest. I think that we get to cut out the first bit that she has, they live thousands of miles apart, and focus in on the characters a little bit more right from the beginning, as opposed to going with circumstance. Because as I've said before, if readers care about your characters, then as you share more about your plot throughout the description, they're going to just be more invested. They don't care necessarily just because there are two people separated by thousands of miles. That isn't enough. They need to kind of get a feel for the character, relate to the character first, and then we can share more plot. You care a lot more about Kaisa, as my guess at the pronunciation. You care a lot more about Kaisa from knowing that she's kind of this by the book person first, and then getting to know that she's meeting this guy. It matters more than if you hear about the guy first and then who she is.
Yeah, this is such a good instructional piece for people writing their blurbs, that you can actually say quite a lot about a character, or at least present some intriguing insight into a character in a very few words. So she has her life planned out. That actually says a huge amount about somebody. You kind of, you know a lot about somebody. If somebody says that she has her life planned out, you've got this image in your mind already. And that's, yeah, as you say, rather than just saying she lives here, that's about the character, character driven. And you've done the same thing with him. He lets the wind guide his sails. That tells us a lot about him as well. So I really like those two lines. Like you say, not dramatically different from what Helena's done, but subtly different enough that suddenly I think it has, I hope she agrees as well, has done the job of elevating it a little bit into the next level of sparking that intrigue and wanting to draw you in a bit.
It's funny how just a couple of words can make a huge amount of difference. He sails around the world is circumstantial. He lets the wind guide his sails is more his philosophy almost. And so it's changing it from being about what is happening to this person versus what is going on inside of this person. And that's what we like to always do. Like you said, it shows that full picture of the person in their mind, in a reader's mind, before even reading the rest of the description. Yeah.
Great. And the other thing I guess you've done quite early on here is you have mentioned effectively the Cold War, and there's a mention of the Cold War and a mention of the Iron Curtain, which are, I guess, circumstantial, but that's quite a powerful scene set for those two characters. And actually, in Helena's, she hasn't mentioned that. There's a mention of the British Embassy, which is the opening scene. We talk about a little bit about the Navy, but it's not immediately obvious reading that this is set in the, because of course, for those of us of a certain age, Finland was the front line of the Cold War. It was the border with Russia, and all sorts of shenanigans went on there. So, for those of us a little bit older, that means something.
Yeah, and it's that we assumed is kind of the target audience. You've got folks in their late 40s, 50s who know about this, and Helena does have Soviet Union mentioned in there.
Yeah.
But by what we tried to do by bringing it into the hook is almost to show this from the beginning is a star-crossed lovers situation. And that is an attempt to raise the stakes as high as they can possibly be, even though in most romances, you're going to have the happily ever after. But, and we haven't read the book. I haven't read the book. So I don't know if there's a happily ever after. I have to assume there is, but because that's the trope of the genre. But by having it as a question from the beginning, will they get together? Because there's so many things stacked against them, it makes you lean forward in your chair. You want to find out. And so you're more likely to buy the book.
Yeah. And if you're interested in the philosophy behind Brian's, you'd mentioned the hook there, which is one of the terms you use when you break down how these paragraphs work. It's really worth listening. You did a podcast interview with us, and obviously if people are involved in any of our courses, there's some training in there as well to really spell this out. Okay, good. So great top line. She has her life planned out. He lets the wind guide his sails. As the Cold War heats up, can they keep love alive on either side of the Iron Curtain? Then you go into a little bit more detail. And this is where, when I was first looking, I was surprised at the length. Is there it's something you aim for in terms of a kind of... Actually, having said that, you've put the code version underneath. I think maybe my eyes were scanning down and including that in it. So maybe the word count is about the same as what Helena had before. Maybe it's a little bit longer.
I think ours is a little bit longer. I think we established the scene a bit more of her meeting Peter, of Kaisa meeting Peter in Kaisa's paragraph. And in Helena's version, it just kind of establishes that she's not looking for romance because she's already engaged. In ours, we kind of go more into her surprise at actually finding something with this person, because it seems that they have this... Kaisa and Peter, our protagonists, have a connection pretty early on in the story. And so whether or not they end up in a relationship in the long term, that's kind of more of a later question. So we want to establish that these people might be meant for each other. And so it took a little bit of extra time because she's already in a relationship. We need to make sure readers don't feel like she's cheating or something.
Yeah.
And so I took a little extra time to establish that she's in a passionless situation, that it's just transactional with her existing fiance, but it's actually maybe love with this other gentleman. And so I felt giving it an extra sentence. We'd usually have something, maybe a sentence or two less for this paragraph, but we felt this need to just give her a little more establishment so we know what is her impossible choice. Stick with the dependability, but no love, or go with this person who's sailing around the world, but she very well might have love, and hopefully that excites the reader and gets them interested.
Yeah, no, I can see that straight away, and it brings to mind there was a film, and I'm struggling to think of the name of it. It had the name of the titular character, as name was the film, but she cheated on her boyfriend who was established at the beginning, and the rest of the film was supposed to be a quirky romance about her falling for this other guy, but because she sort of overtly just went off and casually cheated with somebody, it really, I mean, I remember talking to one of the producers who I knew later, and she said it was such a mistake, and they realised that what you've done here is you've got this girl, Kaiser, who's got her life planned out, and then you've set up this, she's surprised, she's a bit torn, she's not sure what's happening here. Now that is completely different. That's romantic, right? That's somebody who's had the wind knocked out of them by something that's hit them in the face and they don't know quite how to react to it. That's what love is, when love happens like that. So it's great that you, I mean, I'm not a romance writer and don't understand the trope like you do, but you obviously got your teeth into those little subtleties where things can go wrong for you if you put somebody off for what looks like low moral behavior at the beginning. Whereas
that one is a tough one, because there are a lot of romances that turn on that. Being in a loveless relationship and going to something that's potentially better. So you don't want to trigger anybody who's maybe been cheated on or has been in a rough relationship. So that's it just goes to show this stuff is not paint by numbers.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's sometimes a subtle plot device requires extra heavy lifting in the blurb stage.
Yeah. So there's the Kaiser. I mean, you have, again, Helena appears to follow the Brian Cohen school of blurb writing, because there's this paragraph that sets up Kaiser, paragraph that sets up Peter, the protagonists, and you've done the same thing, and you've fleshed out Kaiser a little bit more, very character driven as you described there, and we've got this strong impression of somebody who had everything sorted out, knew what was happening, as being a bit knocked off her feet. Then we come on to William. How have you differed in your description? Peter, his surname is Williams. How have you differed in your description from where Helena was?
So we have in Helena's. I like what she has here. She starts though a little bit with the physical features, which there's nothing wrong with. Obviously, readers like a tall, dark, and handsome naval officer that is not going to turn heads away, certainly. But we tried to make sure that he had his reasoning there, that he had his impossible choice as well. What is standing in the way of him wanting to get together with Kaiser? And so we get this. I really like this this sentence. Not even the excitement of hunting down Russian submarines can compare to the thrill of his lips on hers. Now, what does this sentence do? It has a comparison between the excitement of his life versus her life, but what does it also do? We're bringing back in the Cold War bit. Subtly, we're bringing back in the plot, but we're not using the plot. You can tell I get giddy about this stuff sometimes. We're not using the plot to just share the plot. We're using it to show where Peter's priorities might be changing. We're using it to remind readers of the stakes. And this comparison of the submarines versus kissing, hunting down subs versus kissing, is just such a fun little image that if Helena had, frankly, written a more boring book, we wouldn't have been able to have that kind of comparison. But because she set up such a great framework for what this book is doing plot-wise, it gives us as the blurb writers a lot to work with. And I think one of the reasons that our blurb's a little long is just because we had so much fun with it. It's possible that it's a touch too long, but giving these lyrical turns of phrase, I think gets the reader excited about what's to come.
Yeah. What I like about this, and what I think you've really drawn out more than Helena's initially did, although I agree with you, I think hers works very well, is they on the face of it are very different characters, and we've set that up at the beginning. She's got everything sorted out. He's letting the wind send him around the world. And yet actually you've created two people suddenly put into the same position where things are not what they thought they were. You say that he saw his future rising up the ranks, and suddenly this kiss is as exciting as everything else that was going on in his life, on this nuclear submarine. And so that's the same thing that's happened to her, right? She thinks she's got problems at home, perhaps, which you don't allude to as much as Helena does, as being, I think she uses the expression, some an unhappy relationship. You've just basically set her up as somebody who is quite structured, and then is thrown by this, and he's exactly the same. Now that, again, for a romance book, is quite an exciting prospect. Two people sharing that same giddiness on their part, and I can imagine that's a kind of a very drawing element for somebody who enjoys reading about blossoming romance and blossoming relationships.
Absolutely. And we try also, not only are they compared with what they're going through initially and how it's changed, but we talk about cliffhangers. There's obviously a cliffhanger we like to throw in at the end of the blurb itself to leave readers wanting more. We've always kind of pushed for that. But in a romance description in particular, and this is slightly different than in a thriller or a mystery description, we almost have a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of each paragraph as to what is standing in the way of what they want. Kaise, it's how could she give up her sure thing relationship? And with Peter, it's about his commanding officers are literally standing in his way because she's from a Soviet-friendly nation. So we're seeing the stakes at the end of each paragraph, which is either we want the reader to go click the buy button right after that, or they keep reading.
Okay. And that's the third paragraph, fourth after the top line. So you've done your two characters. We've set these up beautifully. We've then got this torn choices. And I noticed use of language here, star-crossed lovers, famously, of course, Shakespeare's term for Romeo and Juliet, and nicely invoking the greatest love story of all time in many people's eyes. And a lovely little line about will the relationship sink on the high seas, which is beautifully poetic. I don't know if Helena had that one, did she? She may have done, or something similar. But I can tell you guys enjoyed doing this.
Yes,
and then we come on to the crucial last two. So you've either got somebody clicking buy at that point, and frankly, I'm ready to buy at this point. But if they do carry on reading, what is the point of the last two paragraphs here?
So we've got the selling paragraph and the call to action. The selling paragraph is the as you said, the reader hasn't bought yet. So we have maybe some hesitation, something that's standing in their way, just trying to remind them if they stumbled upon this description or they came upon it from an ad, they're probably targeted for a reason. They like this kind of book. So just reminding them that this is contemporary women's fiction novel with some romance. And it's got the historical aspect to it, chemistry, it's got characters that aren't just one-dimensional. These are all things that Helena's target reader, probably the target reader she already has, like these things. And so the additional potential readers she could find, they also find these things compelling. They find these are the things they want in the books they want to read. And so if they hadn't bought before that paragraph, the hope is that these details about what those readers will find inside are exciting enough that this makes them want to click the buy button.
Yeah. And your last sentence is a strong call to action. Buy the English heart to experience a vibrant tale of courage and love in the face of war today! ! And I think that's a sentence that a lot of self-publishing authors will find it difficult to write, because a lot of people do just struggle to be quite as overtly self-promoting as that, even though that is the right thing to do at that stage. You've got to remember, people have got all the way through this blurb. They're showing a lot of respect and a lot of interest in your book. And so at that point, you need to say something obvious to them, which is buy the book.
I think that authors are so good at inhabiting characters in their books. These characters say things and do things that they would never do themselves, of course. And if you're writing a blurb or any kind of marketing copy, you need to remember that you're almost inhabiting a character. Because in the old world, the old mahogany desk world, as my friend Jim Kukral might say, it's people would not write their own descriptions. Authors would not write their own descriptions. The publisher would do that. So you have to remember, you're inhabiting the character of the publisher who might say and do things you would never do. So do not think of this as you speaking highly of yourself in a way that is immodest. You need to remember you are the publisher when you're writing this description. You are the publishing company. And the publishing company would not be modest. They would not hold back. They would be open about wanting to sell you this book. So if that's at all helpful to picture yourself as the publisher instead of as yourself, that is an exercise I would recommend.
Yeah. Putting on that different hat, inhabiting that character is a great description. Okay, great. And then it's very interesting for me to see what somebody gets from you, by the way, when they invest in your services. Obviously, Helena's getting this free of charge because we've selected her as our Booklab victim number 2. But what you actually get is you then get a little bit of code. So with the HTML to block up, to bold up the right parts and separate out the paragraph so it looks pretty on Amazon. And then beneath that, and I hadn't realized how comprehensive this service is from you, Brian, you get your Facebook ad copy all done for you. You get your headline, your sub-headline, and then a whole series of Amazon ad headline options. And I think you've got 10 of those. So there's quite a lot of work goes into each one of these for you guys.
It's funny because we started this a few years ago. It was just me in a room, basically. And at first it was just the description, but we've always tried to give authors everything they really need in order to not just put up the new description, but also to run ads to it. Amazon ads have been so popular. And one of the issues, I think, is authors just trying to figure out, okay, well, what different can I try as an Amazon ad headline? So we give a variety of options at Best Page Forward to make sure that you're testing different things, you're seeing which one converts the best, and then you can focus your increasing your bid on your Amazon ads with the highest converting copy, with the best keyword targets that you have, and going for that. So we do try to provide as much as possible because we're authors ourselves. We know what goes into this, and I've thrown a lot of money into Amazon ads and Facebook ads myself. So I'm fortunate that I've gotten to test to see what tends to work best.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great service, and I think a lot of authors who are quite happy, not happy, but they will sit and write a 100,000 word book will struggle to write the 12 words for an advert to outsource that to the experts. I think it's a very useful thing. It's very interesting to see this in its entirety, and we will include all of that, including those Amazon headlines, so you can study them on the PDF to get to download along with this episode. Brian, it's a good one tonight. That's been 26 minutes talking about the blurb for this romance book. So we're a little bit over time, but I think it's been really interesting and very instructional, as always, to hear how you've approached this and the theory behind the words.
Thanks for having me, James. I mean, this is so fun. Obviously, I love to nerd out about this. And when we can take a description that's probably, if I were to letter grade it, a B+, it's a good description. Taking that to an A, we have to get into the nitty gritty, but I appreciate you giving me the time to go into depth about this. And obviously, if anyone wants to find out more, bestpageforward.net, find out more about what we do, and we're happy to share the goods with you.
Superb. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, James.
So Brian really got into this, and he was motivated, I think, by the fact that it started off good, which gave him and his team a challenge.
Yeah. Brian's moving more into this area now, concentrating on blurb writing, and he's got a very good system in place. He's got good people working with him. He's done some blurbs for me. So, there is a formula that Brian uses, which people will start to recognize now, but it's effective. And it's good to see him getting his teeth into Helena's blurb.
Well, what was interesting is that Helena had done Brian's course and used his formula, and he recognised that, but he improved it and made it very good indeed. So she was very excited about the blurb. She's desperate to change it. I've told her for a couple of weeks just to hold off, but it's coming soon. Now let's hear from Helena herself, who, by the way, it was an absolute delight to interview Helena. She's a really lovely person, great to speak to, as you're going to find out now. So this is what Helena Halme thought about the feedback that you've just heard about her book. Well, Helena, how did you feel when the email dropped into your inbox to say you'd been selected as the second victim of Booklab?
I was delighted. I mean, I was really, really delighted. I thought this is fantastic because there are so many things that you don't know about your own books, and there are very, very few people who actually tell you straight what the issue is, apart from your editor. And so as an independent author, it's incredibly important to get a neutral viewpoint. And then, weeks went by, and then I started thinking, I thought, oh, they're going to criticize it. So, that's sort of, but yeah, no, I'm definitely taking the positives out of it, because this is, this is something that money can't buy. Positive, she says.
Yeah, okay. Now, first of all, let's have a little bit about you, because Jenny and others sort of second guessed that English wasn't necessarily your first language, and there's obviously a Scandinavian theme to the book. So tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I was born in Finland, and I moved here because I met a British man or an English man. This sounds
like one of your books. Was he a sailor?
Yeah, I met my Navy husband at the British Embassy in Helsinki.
Are you being serious?
No, I am being serious, and I was engaged to be married.
Wow.
To a dependable, boring man who I didn't know.
Where do you get your ideas for your books from?
So that part is the same. But yeah, so I came over here in my 20s, and I started working for the BBC as a translator. I don't know if you've heard of Caversham. They've literally just moved out of the place. Yeah. So
Caversham was the historic home of the languages monitoring service that the BBC ran, that basically also fed into MI6, though not a lot of people knew that at the time. But
and also CIA. So so we were a little bit we were official spies, I think.
Yes, yeah.
But I had to sign the Official Secrets Act.
Yeah, that was an interesting crossover, because the BBC obviously is protective over its neutrality and goes to great lengths to tell people it's not a state broadcaster. But Caversham was a bit of a crossover area, because obviously BBC had the technology to listen in to people around the world. During the Cold War, it was a very important place. It
was, yes. I mean, there were lots and lots of people there who couldn't go back, who'd sort of escaped from the other side of the Iron Curtain, which, for a writer, obviously, this is wonderful stuff. And I always felt really lucky that I could just go back whenever I wanted. Of course, the flights were very expensive then. But anyway, so I came over here and I worked for the BBC, and then we were married, obviously, and I had children, and then I started to sort of find those hours a little bit difficult because we listened really until midnight, I think. So then I left that and I trained as an accountant because I went to work for my husband in his construction industry business. And I tried to escape for about 20 years.
Right.
And during that time I wrote. So then in 2004, I took an MA in creative writing in Bath Spa University, thinking that I needed, we Finns, we believe that if we want to do something else, we have to train, we have to qualify. So I felt I needed to qualify as a writer in order to write. You don't, but okay. It was fun. It was a fun year.
Was it useful?
It was very useful, yeah.
Okay.
Very. Awesome. But these were the times where you were looking for an agent, and there was only Vanity Publishing, which was really, really looked down upon, and people didn't want to do it. And I think one or two people from our course did. And of course, there weren't the resources, so it was incredibly difficult to do it. And so I started looking for agents, and I wrote a book, Coffee and Vodka, in fact, is from the course, which is quite a dark sort of family moves from Finland to Sweden, and they're quite a displaced family after the move, and there are issues. There's domestic violence. It's quite a dark family sort of drama. And so I then, thinking that I might want to do something a bit lighter, even though it comes not very naturally to a Nordic person. I then wrote The Red King of Helsinki, which was a spy tale. I don't think you can call it a thriller because it's not. It's a bit more like William Boyd's spy books. It's a sort of a more character-driven spy tale. And that's set in Helsinki in 1979, and again about Cold War, about KGB spies, and and I loved writing that book. And it's really a young adult book because the hero or heroine is 17-year-old school student. So I just literally did a school talk last week about it, and they loved the story because it's a little bit adult, but at the same time, when I wrote it, I don't think young adult as a genre existed. So,
no.
But it's a standalone.
Children or adult, and then
should I perhaps change that to write under a different name, or that because it's got so many other themes that I have in all of my books, which is about displacement, about different cultures, about political events affecting the small person on the regular man on the street. I've kept it under my own name. Yeah.
Okay, so when did you move on to your series that we've looked at? We've looked at The English Heart, but I see there's a series there.
Well, I started blogging. The Red King of Helsinki was quite successful with agents, so I got an agent interested. So I then started blogging in 2007. And I had quite a popular blog. I think it's because I was one of the few people who actually was from Finland and blogging in amongst the bloggers. So people said, why did you come over here? And I said, well, I'll tell you a story. And so that's how the story started. And I thought it was just going to be a couple of blog posts, but 25 blog posts later, I realized I was writing a novel because actually I veered from the truth quite significantly.
You're allowed to do that in a novel. That's okay.
Yeah,
so The English Heart was the first one then. That was the semi-autobiographical, and as it turns out, although I didn't know that, I don't think, do you say that anywhere in the book?
I don't, because the thing is that it's not as much autobiographical as people think.
Okay. It's the
there are several things that actually didn't happen, but
okay.
Nobody knows what apart from my husband.
That's fine. So that was the first one. Then you've got The Young Heart, The True Heart, The Good Heart, The Faithful Heart as well, I think.
Yeah, that's right. So the first one, can I show covers? Is that all right?
Yeah, of course you can.
No, this is the English Heart. It started life as The English Man.
Oh, okay.
So it's changed covers quite a lot, but this is the final one. So this is The English Heart, and then number 2 is The Faithful Heart, which takes them to the UK there, and how she finds life in the UK. The Good Heart is really something very traumatic happens in the faithful heart. So the good heart is really dealing with that and trying to come to terms with it. And that's the final one, which is the true heart.
Okay.
And that is really the final book, apart from the fact that there's going to be a Christmas book, which I couldn't leave them. So
a Christmas special.
Yeah, so it's a Christmas special. And then I wrote, this is a prequel, which is my Perma-Free, which is a prequel. And this is actually quite true to my own life. It's the relationship with the older man thing.
Intriguing, Helena. Okay, well, look, you've thrown, for the YouTube watchers, we've shown your covers on screen. So why don't we start with the cover then? So we gave your cover to Stewart, who you know is a renowned cover designer and designs in all genres, including yours. And he gave his feedback, which was pretty positive right from the beginning. So you must have been, first of all, quite pleased with that. What did you think of the feedback you got from Stewart?
I thought it was wonderful. I mean, I get his point about first of all, the fact that it's in genre. I thought that was fantastic because it's so important and it's so difficult when you're a writer yourself to see your genre and to see what your book should look like, which is probably, I guess, why traditionally published authors don't get a say in their cover, but that's another discussion. And
that's a surprising thing, isn't it? And I mentioned it to Stewart that it's quite difficult to get your genre right, and it's more common than you think to see a book and realise they've just got the cover wrong. They've got the cover does not tell you about the book, but it's silly how difficult that is, but how important it is. Yeah,
and also the fact that he felt that the font was right, because that's the one thing I've been slightly worried about, because I wondered if I should go for a more flowery, more sort of, I don't know the names of the fonts, but you know what I mean when I say.
Yes, and he scripting font, and he did talk about that as being a possibility, and I think I felt, and he probably agreed, that your books aren't quite the script flowery genre. So he was pleased with that. I picked up the italics thing, which I'm not 100% about, but I can see how they work when I look across your entire genre. But he was much more kind of, it's fine.
Yes, he was, which I was, again, very pleased about. But, I mean, the reason really, I guess, the English, because it is the word, because it's about the Englishman. I'll get back to that, the editor's comments on that. But, and also because that's the only word that changes with the titles of the books. So I think I like it, but, I can see why people would say it just sort of disturbs the line of your eye, doesn't it, a little bit?
Sometimes the spacing as well, but anyway, so he was fine, and he's the expert. What he did say he felt needed changing is that your author name colours needed to be adapted, or to get some sort of more white behind it to make your author name stand out.
I was slightly surprised about that, but I get that point as well. So I'm definitely going to. Can I mention my cover designer?
Yes, of course.
Jessica Bell does all my covers, and we work a lot, and we've worked a lot of years together, and she's incredibly good, because I actually gave her. Just trying to think what book I gave her, but I gave her the brief with the book covers that I liked and I felt were in my genre, and then she adapted them from that. And I sort of wanted a little bit of a 70s, 80s vibe in them as well, with the sun and that sort of little bit of a hippie-ish thingy going on. So that was sort of what I wanted, and that's why she's got the sort of the sun.
Yeah,
so I get it. Like even now, when I look at that cover, you can see that if I do the right one. Sorry, so I can see what he means. That it sort of gets lost a bit up there, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's something a Stewart-like cover designer is going to notice more than me. But then he knows why people linger and stay on a cover and move on to the next one. So it's worth taking into account. What I love about that is you've gone for this kind of 70s vibe, which Jessica has managed to find, but inadvertently it's become very Instagram. It's become a very modern look, that overcranked contrast, which is absolutely, my family 70s photographs look a bit like that, but that's what Instagram does. It's a retro look, isn't it? Yeah, very trendy.
Yeah, it is. I love them. But can I show you the old covers?
Yes, of course.
So it started life off as The Englishman. So that was my first cover. That was designed by a man. And I love that cover because that's actually my Englishman. So
that is your Englishman.
But I think, I love this cover, but I just didn't think it did sell very well when it started off as a Kindle. But it's I think it's just a bit too unromantic. So
I quite like it though.
Yeah, well, but you see, you're not my target audience.
And I'm a military. I like the military stuff. So
yeah. So that was the next one, which I went sort of a bit more romantic. And I did like this lady did my covers. She wasn't a cover designer, but she was a graphic designer. And so she then decided that she didn't want to do covers anymore. So I couldn't keep having it. So, with my books coming in series. So I had to go back to Jessica. And Jessica, then we went really left field. And though I love these covers, they didn't really tell the story enough.
No, they don't at a glance tell you the genre, do they?
No.
But they're a lovely cover.
Really, when you think about this is how books now are. When you not Jojo Moyes, but say Liam Moriarty, quite often there's not very much in the cover. But anyway, so that's the sort of story. So I've had lots of covers, so I'm really pleased to like the cover, because otherwise you would have gone, oh no.
Yes, if you'd thrown it out. But only subtle changes needed. Okay, good. Well, that's great. And that was that was Stewart. So let's move on to Jenny then. So Jenny read the Look Inside. She reads it. Jenny's primarily, I think, a developmental editor. She thinks about structure a bit. So what did you think about her feedback?
Well, there were lots and lots of things that I'm going to take home from that. And I'm going to obviously discuss with my editor, because I've got an editor who's been in the business for 35 years, I think. And she's in my genre. So she's sort of, same kind of, so she reads the kind of books that I write as well. And I get the one point that I absolutely agree with is The Englishman. I think I overdid it, particularly in the beginning, because it's new to her, so she's not, but I think that, and also because the book was called The Englishman, so I'm definitely going to change that without even talking to Dorothy, my editor. The other bits I was a little bit confused about, to be honest, but I mean, I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to actually play that back to her and then discuss it with her. What I was also pleased about was the fact that she did think it was a book club book, which is exactly what I think all my books are. All my books are book club books, which is really, really good, because that's where the cover is going. That's where I'm going. So I'm not Mills and Boon, but it, still it's romance, but it's sort of, I think it used to be called literary romance in the old day. So I was really pleased about that. And sorry, I've made some notes. See what else I'd say.
It was quite subtle. Jenny did make some quite small points that I would have struggled to pick up on inflections and use of language and so on. Quite detailed, which actually is quite a good thing, Helena, because again, it means generally she thought it was good, and she was down in the weeds, if you like, as the Americans say.
Saying that 10% of people would notice these things, I thought that was fantastic. I mean, so I'm definitely going to, and The Englishman particularly was something I thought, I know I've overdone that. So well, that's good. And we haven't had so far, you're the second one, we haven't had anyone yet where our experts have said, this has all got to change. This has been a positive response to this is well written, this is good, and here are my thoughts. So we may get one in the future, but so far it's been a pleasure. But that just says about self-published books. There's this
quality.
I'm of the age where I remember where people were still quite. I think there's an upper class English saying sniffy. But that just shows you, doesn't it, that you picked a couple of people random and they still come up trumps.
Yeah, so. and from my point of view, as somebody writing a book at the moment, just listening to Jenny analyse your text was a very valuable thing for us. I mean, regardless of the detail of it, from your point of view. Okay, and finally, we're going to move on to the blurb, which Brian really got his teeth into. He was quite excited about this. I mean, you've got a very comprehensive new set of blurb to go with.
I read it to my husband, as this story was sort of, and he was like, wow, how did you know? Because it was actually more exciting to kiss you than to go and chase submarines. And I went, after 35 years of marriage, that's quite nice. Anyway, I'm embarrassed now.
No, that's nice. And it's amazing that Brian nailed that. He picked up he found that spark, the spark that makes the book work. He found and put into the blurb, isn't he?
I want him to do all my blurb now. Because I was so very nearly there, but I think he's just added the magic into it, and it's like honestly, it's magic. It's just I loved the fact that he gave me B plus though. I mean, I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
and
just
that was helpful for him. The fact that you had got high standard anyway. I think that's what, as he said in his interview, they wanted to really get it to the next level. But well done, Brian, because I think that's 2 in a row now where the author has gone back to Brian and said, right, you're doing my blurbs for the future. So
I honestly, I cannot imagine that he did that without knowing the book fully. I think that's amazing, really.
Well, that's a definite win, and we should reiterate, not everyone's watching on YouTube, so they won't necessarily see the covers, but you should really watch this episode on YouTube because you get to see all the visuals. But of course, everything is downloadable at selfpublishingformula.com/booklab2. And there's the mug. And unfortunately, I've got my guest mug, my spotty mug today, but I need to... remembered. Well, Helena, look, thank you so much indeed for allowing us to tear open your... marketing platform and put it back together again. It would be very useful for us if you just leave. I don't know if you're planning to make any immediate changes, but just a few weeks, maybe two weeks or so, to allow the podcast. The podcast is going to go out on Friday. We're recording this on Monday. So what's that? Friday the 6th. So to go out there, and if we leave it at least 2 weeks from then before you make any changes, so people listen to the podcast, go to your Amazon page, you can see what we're talking about, rather than the replaced version. Then after a couple of weeks, we can go back and see what. I know you're chomping at the bit to make some changes, but I'm
on holiday anyway, so
there you go.
I'm on holiday for 2 weeks, so yeah.
And what we're really interested in is what difference this makes to your sales, because that's the whole point of this. It's not just a pleasing exercise to make experts feel happy. It's to make you in a better position to sell books. So you've got to let us know. We know Dave Behrens has got back to us and seen an immediate difference in his book sales, and his covers probably needed more work than yours. But it will be interesting to see what difference it makes to you.
Okay. I have got a promotion on my box set, so I have used sneakily some of that for my box set. Is that all right? It's a different book, honestly.
That's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Well, look, good luck with that, and hopefully people have learned something from listening to your feedback, and I think you've taken it in a very good way as well. That's the other nightmare I have as an interviewer, is I get somebody at the end and say, well, I'm not, they're all rubbish, they don't know what they're talking about. And because some people don't take feedback very well.
I think that's again the traditional publishers and traditionally published authors versus, not that one wants to generalize, but it is what they're used to doing. They're used to fighting their corner with their publishers and the whole machinery. Whereas as indies, we know that we need to improve, and the more we improve, the more we sell, and we can do it ourselves. So I just don't think there's any point in not taking on board what people have said. It may hurt.
Yeah.
A little bit. But I don't think, really, there is no point.
It's very important, very important. Okay, brilliant. Helena, thank you so much indeed for joining us from sunny Crouch End in London.
Thank you.
It's unbelievably sunny, isn't it, in England at the moment?
I know, I can't believe it. We're going to Spain, it's probably going to feel cold.
Yeah, almost certainly. Okay, Helena, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much.
There you go. I told you she was really delightful to speak to, Helena, and absolutely took it all in the right way. Is keen to make changes and keen to develop her product as she sees it, and hopefully sell more books, which is what this is all about. And there's the second Booklab person in a row who said, "I'm buying all my blurbs from Brian Cohen in the future."
Brian has mentioned to me that his business has ticked up, so
good.
That's good testimony for Brian.
Well, it really is, and Helena was can't wait to get the next set of blurbs from him. So yeah, I think he did a really good job. But the point of this exercise, as I said to Helena a few moments ago in that interview, is that we all learn hearing the critical feedback and the changes that get made, and we don't just learn from, I think, hearing Janie and Stewart and Brian come up with areas that need improving and think, well, what about my situation? We also learn just about this process of which happens in the artistic world of having feedback, taking it on board it correctly and making modifications, which sounds a bit easier than it is. And I remember when I first started working at the BBC, like most people, I wasn't great at taking that criticism and feedback and reacted probably badly against it and thought, well, what do they know? And then by the end of my 10, 12 years there, started to work out you need to listen carefully to somebody who sat there objectively, watched your report and realised it was rubbish and told you that. But it's an absolutely important part of being successful.
Absolutely. And yes, my challenge for the next one is to pick a book that needs tons and tons of work. So you have some difficult interviews to do rather than these slam dunks I've given you the first 2 weeks.
Yeah. Don't make it too bad. And we don't have any really bad gold Patreon.
I can't really do that now because whoever I choose is going to think that I don't like it. No, I'll certainly look forward to the next one. So I suppose we should mention if people want to be included in this, in the Booklab for the third time, you need to be a gold Patreon subscriber, which you can do at patreon.com/SPF podcast. Is that right, John?
That is correct. I'm not John, I'm James, but yeah, that's correct.
Sorry, Michael. SPF podcast. And then just drop us a line to say that you'd like to be considered. I'll have a look at the applications and we'll pick one out and see how we get on.
Good. Okay, a couple of little bits of news to mention that we were talking about just off air, which I think is worthy of mention. So ConvertKit, which is a mailing list provider, it's the one I use actually, and we have used it in SPF, and we're using it in one of our other side businesses, and we are affiliates for them, so we're quite well connected with ConvertKit. They've announced a fairly significant rebrand, and I'm just looking for it. Here it is. So they are losing the word ConvertKit. Now I have to say right from the beginning, after a while a name becomes meaningless because you just know what the name is, like Amazon, or it's just a river, right? But we all know the name. ConvertKit is always felt to me a slightly odd name. I kind of know what they were doing with that name, but anyway, they've decided quite bravely to rebrand, I think they turn over 10 million a month now. I think I read that, Mark. That's probably out of date, that figure. They're going to call themselves Server. I believe it's Server. Let me see. Where is it? Server. It's SEVA, pronounced Sever. So as in SEH-VAH.
The fact that they've had to explain that tells you that it's not a good name.
And
it's one of these made. I like ConvertKit, but I don't think this is a good name. It's one of those made up kind of focus group names that are actually, they're great for SEO and for getting domain names because they're basically made up names. But does it tell you what they do? I mean, I know Amazon doesn't really tell you what they do, but I don't know. I don't like that much.
It means selfless service. But they've made that up because it's a made up name.
I hate this stuff. It's terrible.
Okay, there you go. Well, your Mrs. Dawson is much more into rebranding and this kind of thing than you are. You do glaze over a little bit when we start talking about branding in our meetings.
Yeah, I know. But with the fact that you had to explain how that word is intended to be pronounced, and it still doesn't make any sense. There's, anyway, I don't like the name. I do like them. I think it's one of the better options for mailing list providers.
Yeah,
it's quite expensive, not too expensive, and it has a good suite of it's nicely put together. Looks nice, easy to use.
It does. And I know lots of people in our community talk about MailerLite, and we're going to look more into MailerLite for the 101 course release in the autumn. Make sure that's included in there as well. There are 3 new features that come out with the relaunch of Server instead of ConvertKit, and they are to do with templates and subscriber preferences, drop-down boxes and so on, and all the right places just to smooth it.
Press a button and it pronounces its new name for you.
Nathan Barry's head pops up to explain to you that he had a dream one night and the word sever came into his head. So that's one change that we're going to mention. And the other one I'm going to mention is YouTube. So YouTube, and I've probably mentioned this before, the AdWords platform, which is not just used for running the pay-per-click PPC stuff across the internet. It's also the platform used for running YouTube ads, which is something we do talk about and recommend for authors. And they have been running a new platform parallel with the old one for a long time now. I'm thinking 18 months, knocking on 2 years. And it's been a little bit backwards and forwards. They did initially try to put everyone on it. Lots of people complained, and now you could run the 2 of them. And they finally announced it about 3 weeks ago, that they are going to cease the old platform in about 8 weeks' time. So the new platform will be the only one you can use from that period onwards. At the same time, they are making a change to the YouTube platform as well. It's in beta at the moment, but if you run a YouTube channel, you'll see that instead of Creator Studio, so if you're used to running a YouTube channel, you'll know what the Creator Studio is, you're going to get something called YouTube Studio. It is in beta. I've got access to it, and I think most people have access to it, but it might be one of those things that they've only rolled out to some people, maybe partners that we are at the moment. Again, I do think this is slightly odd, and it's a bit frustrating from our point of view running courses and trying to advise people on how to do this. When you go into YouTube Beta, which switches you over, you can switch back via settings. You then discover that there's loads of missing features that aren't there yet. So playlists, live streaming, translation, transcription, audio library, customized channel, and then more are all missing from the beta platform at the moment, which pretty much makes it useless. However, you can start to see what it's going to look like for you. And I don't really, because there's so little functionality that we can actually use there at the moment, I can't give you a definitive opinion on whether I think it's good or not. But I do know that I'm going to be re-recording the YouTube Ads for Authors course within Ads for Authors over the summer with this. So that's my headache, not yours. You've had enough headaches with Facebook.
Welcome to my world. And also the fact that you mispronounced the word settings for sweatings is a Freudian. How hot it is at the moment.
It is hot at the moment. Everything's hot. But we live in a world where they do change these platforms a lot. And to be fair to them, the bigger you are, the longer you've been running, the more difficult it is to make significant changes. And probably better that they do improve it over time, even if it is troublesome at the time. And everyone hates the new platforms all the time. All you get is hate for them. Like every time Facebook changed their interface. But eventually we all get used to it and like it. Good. Long episode, but I think worth it because I thoroughly enjoyed listening to the feedback. I absolutely loved talking to Helen. It was a real delight talking to her, and she came along to London Book Fair earlier this year as well. Hopefully we'll see her again next year. I've asked Helena to let us know about her sales because we want to hear that this has had a positive impact and hopefully hasn't destroyed her career.
10%.
You want 10%? What if it's a 10% drop?
Ignore I said that.
It won't be. I think our sales are going to go up as a result of this, particularly the Blurb. Thank you so much indeed for listening and watching, hopefully on YouTube this week. We're going to be in the Stewart near Grand Central Station, a bar between Madison and Park Avenue, Wednesday night at 7 o'clock in New York. That is something like the 10th, 11th. Can you look it up? 11th of July. We'd love to buy you a beer that night. And if you can't make it, we'll certainly be here again next Friday. We are going to do a 2-part special on children's books. It won't be just for children's authors because we talk about marketing and AMS ads in particular and what's working at the moment, but with 2 successful children's books authors who are using the digital platforms that we talk about all the time to make a career. And we get asked a lot by children's authors, does this stuff work for children's authors? Well, you're going to find out that it does in the next couple of episodes, and you'll learn something, whatever your genre. I promise you that as well. We may even present 1 or 2 of them from New York.
Who knows? We're at the top of the Empire State Building.
Yes, with a big ape hanging off. Was he a gorilla?
No way to talk about John Dyer.
And on that bombshell, let's say goodbye. Thank you very much indeed for listening. We'll speak to you next week. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.